वाले सवाल जो हैं मैं एक साथ लेना चाहूँगा ताकि because they are overlapping questions. First of all, let me say this. As a foreign minister of an SCO member state, Mr. Bhutto Zardari was treated accordingly. As a promoter, justifier, and I'm sorry to say spokesperson of a terrorism industry, which is the mainstay of Pakistan, his positions were called out and they were countered, including at the SCO meeting itself. So let me come to the specifics. On the China-Pakistan economic corridor, this so-called corridor, I think it was made very clear, not once but twice in the SCO meeting, that connectivity is good for progress, but connectivity cannot violate the territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. So this has been our long-standing position. Nobody should have any doubt about it. And I assure you, those who are in the room today had no doubt about it. I made sure of that. Regarding आपका दूसरा जो था वो G20 के बारे में था. Now, you know, I don't think there is a G20 issue to debate with anybody. Certainly not with a country which is nothing to do with the G20. I mean, Jammu and Kashmir was, is, will always be a part of India. And the G20 meetings are held in all the Indian states and union territories, so it is completely natural that it is held there. जो आपका जो दूसरा सवाल जो था कि from what I understood that India and Pakistan should sit together. You know, victims of terrorism do not sit together with perpetrators of terrorism to discuss terrorism. Victims of terrorism defend themselves, counter acts of terrorism, they call it out, they delegitimize it, and that is exactly what is happening. So to come here and preach these hypocritical words as though we are on the same boat, I mean, they are committing acts of terrorism. And, you know, I don't want to jump the gun on what happened today, but I think we're all feeling equally outraged. So, I think, I mean, let's be very, very clear on this. You know, on this matter, the terrorism matter, I mean, I would say Pakistan's credibility is depleting even faster than its forex reserves. So you know, let's be clear what this is about. On your question, you know, is this a breakthrough? Look, he came here as a member, a foreign minister of an SCO member state. That is part of multilateral diplomacy. Please do not see it as anything more than that. It was not meant as anything more than that. It was not treated as anything more than that. And I think nothing that from what he said or what I heard he said deserves for this to be treated more than that. The China question. Look, my understanding of what the Chinese said, I think they used the word stable, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that there is an abnormal position in the boundary areas, border areas, along the boundary. And we had a very frank discussion about it. It's not the first discussion. I had spoken to Foreign Minister Chingang on the sidelines of the G20 as well. We have to take the disengagement process forward. And I have made it very clear, frankly, publicly as well, and you know, what I say within the room is not different from what I say outside, which is that India-China relations are not normal and cannot be normal if the peace and tranquility in the border areas is disturbed. You know, I've been very, very clear about it. I've been very consistent about it. And I have not changed my position at this meeting either.
Thank you, sir. Listen, before in the interest of efficiency, please do not fix the questions or try to come back to it.
And that was External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar speaking on behalf of India, that is chairing the SCO this year. The press conference comes after 2 days of bilateral meetings and the SCO Foreign Ministers meeting that just concluded in Goa. He called it productive and useful for setting a ground for the high-stakes SCO summit in July. Now, on the other side, my colleague Susan Tehrani will take over from New York, bringing you WION Live Broadcast.
Many other
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani. First, let's take a look at the stories making headlines this hour. Russia's mercenary group announces plans to pull out of the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Wagner group says it is not getting enough weapons to fight the battle. Police arrested a suspect after 8 people were killed and 14 wounded in Serbia's second mass shooting in just 2 days, prompting the country's president to propose tough new gun controls. Authorities in India's northeastern state of Manipur have evacuated some 20,000 people to camps under army protection to prevent escalation of ethnic violence just days after clashes. A 3-alarm fire broke out at a commercial building in southeast Los Angeles. More than 100 firefighters and dozens of fire engines rushed to contain the mass blaze.
We're seeing hundreds of thousands of people gathering along this entire procession route just to catch a glimpse of the king, the royal couple, as they will be officially crowned.
And Britain is ready for its first coronation in 70 years, with Charles to be crowned king in an elaborate ceremony steeped in solemn rituals and more than a millennium of history. The war in Ukraine is changing gears since the alleged assassination attempt on the life of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The question remains, who was the mastermind behind the attack, and was it an assassination drive or a false flag? According to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the alleged drone attack on the Kremlin could not have happened without Washington's knowledge. He believes Ukraine and the U.S. were lying about the incident.
If you believe that as soon as the United States and Ukraine rejected the accusations, we should stop thinking what we know about. This is not the case, and the ability of our Ukrainian and Western friends to lie is very well known.
This is the video that has been doing the rounds on Russian social media, which shows a drone being shot down right above the Kremlin. Now, as you well know, Kremlin is the fortress that houses the official residence of the Russian president. According to Russia, this attempt to assassinate Putin was a joint mission carried out by Washington and Kyiv, and Moscow has reaffirmed that it reserves the right to take countermeasures on the attack. But following the attack and claims made by Russia, Ukraine has denied responsibility. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says we do not attack Moscow or Putin. In addition to that, the U.S. has rejected any accusation of involvement and accused Russia of, quote unquote, lying about its role in the drone attack. The alleged assassination attempt on Putin isn't the only woe for Russia. The Wagner head says that the forces will withdraw from the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut on May 10th due to heavy losses and inadequate ammunition supplies. He's also asked defense chiefs to deploy regular army troops in their place.
Мы собирались к 9 мая 23 года овладеть населенным пунктом Бахмут. Но увидев это, околовоенные бюрократы с 1 мая фактически прекратили любые поставки, чтобы не дать нам это сделать. Потому что они сидят, трясут жирными животами и думают, что они войдут в историю победителями. Они уже в нее вошли трусами.
Before his announcement, Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner group, released a new video where he was seen standing amid a field of corpses. He claimed these are members of the Wagner group who died on Thursday. And given the circumstances, he was threatened to pull his forces out of Bakhmut on May 10th, 5 days from now. He says his forces are suffering losses because of the Kremlin not supplying ammunition. He also launched a salvo of sharp-worded comments aimed at the Russian defense minister and chief of Russia's army staff. Prigozhin challenged the Russian leadership and blamed the deaths on a lack of support from Moscow. He claimed that there was a 70% shortage of ammunition.
Продвижение идет не так быстро, как хотелось бы. Почему продвижение быстро? Вот это вот парни ЧВК «Вагнер», которые погибли сегодня. Еще кровь свежая. Сними всех.
Okay, a lot to unpack. For more on this, we are joined on the program by Alina Frolova from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Alina is a former deputy defense minister of Ukraine. Minister, welcome to WION. Thank you so much for joining us. We just got reports that Russian installed governor of Zaporizhia region has ordered the evacuation of villages close to the front line, saying that Ukrainian shelling had intensified in days recently. Has this spring offensive already started?
Good afternoon. Well, no one knows. I mean, that we will see in some kind of developments in the nearest days, but maybe yes. And let's do not forget that this is like a long operation anyway, and we can hardly see some kind of one-day boost and to identify that it's already offensive. So let's observe.
And, you know, despite recent accusations by Moscow and Ukraine with support from the United States' attempted assassination on Putin in a drone attack on the Kremlin, Director of the National Intelligence Avron Haines said that the U.S. was still investigating the drone incident. And she said in a testimony yesterday that at this stage, we don't have information that would allow us to provide independent assessments of Kremlin's claims. Where does Ukraine stand in all of this? And are you aware of any conversation that Ukraine and the United States have had in this regard?
Officially, there were no reports on some conversation between Ukraine and United States on this regard. Most of experts in Ukraine consider this operation as a false flag operation because, we perfectly do understand that, first of all, no one expects that Putin will sit inside the Kremlin. The second, such type of UAV and the blows which we saw obviously could not make any substantial harm. So to say about, and plus the air defense of the Russia didn't saw these UAVs, it means that probably they were operated from somehow nearby. And all these facts, they are just showing, demonstrating that probably this is the false flag operation. At the same time, Russia for some period already changed narrative that they are fighting not with Ukraine but with United Nations or with United States or with NATO. So because actually they are losing this war, and for them to acknowledge that they are losing to Ukrainians is like some kind of very harmful for authorities and for Putin himself. So they changed the narrative for fighting with US, and therefore somehow try to excuse the losses which they're bearing and the dynamics which actually they don't have in this war.
Former Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine, Alina Frolova, thank you so much for joining us on WION Live.
Thank you.
Kyiv.
Thank you.
We are now being joined by Ksenia Kondrativa, a journalist from Russia. Welcome to the broadcast, and thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk about this news about the Wagner group, but generally about how Russian troops are faring in Ukraine. The Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, she said yesterday that Russian forces are unlikely to be able to mount a significant offensive operation this year, even if the anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive is not fully successful. She also said that the Russian military had gained less territory in April than in any other prior months and was facing, quote unquote, significant shortfalls in munition and personnel as well. Are you hearing the same? Is this what's being reported from your side as well? And is Russia concerned?
Thanks for having me, first of all. Well, we get the reports from the US and all the think tanks. We get the reports from battlefield from our own sources and from the Minister of Defense. Yes, some of them are more or less paint the correct picture, but I think the only, since the information is highly censored in Russia and in Ukraine, I would just look at the maps trying to assess what's really happening. I would only look at the maps and see that Russia hasn't lost any territories. What we know happening for the past few days is that Ukrainian troops have attempted to go into sort of test the weak spots in the first line, or maybe a little prior to the first line of Russia's troops, but none of these attacks, again, as we know, has been successful. But yes, everyone is waiting for Ukraine's counteroffensive and has been waiting for months now. It's difficult to say whether it has started already or it's just about to start. But, I think the war, again, I advise just to look at the maps and to see what's going on the battlefield. I'm not at the battlefield myself. I'm in St. Petersburg, far away from the war zone. So the best updates you would get from those who are actually there close to the line.
Ksenia Kondrativa, a journalist from Russia. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, and we hope to speak to you again at greater length very soon. Thanks. Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said granting U.S. access to Philippines military bases was a defensive step. He said it would be useful if China were to attack Taiwan. Manila wants better ties with Washington without alarming Beijing, which is its largest trading partner. Marcos Jr.'s statement comes at the end of his 4-day visit to the United States. His visit included a summit with President Joe Biden. The two countries came to an agreement to update their nearly 72-year defensive alliance. Back in 2014, Philippines and the U.S. signed the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. Initially, it was conceived to improve disaster responses. Marcos said now there is an additional aspect the tensions across the Taiwan Strait. He said safety of Philippines nationals in Taiwan is of great importance.
Tensions across the Taiwan Straits seem to be continuing to increase. Then the safety of our Filipino nationals in Taiwan becomes of primordial importance. And so that these EDCA sites will also prove to be useful for us should that terrible occurrence come about.
U.S. and Philippines were blocked in an agreement in February 2023. It permitted the U.S. to use 4 additional military bases in the Philippines. China has responded by stating that the decision was stoking the fire of regional tension. Marcos said he told China's foreign minister that the EDCA sites were not intended for quote-unquote offensive action. And now Marcos Jr. says the U.S. has not proposed any kind of action for the Philippines in terms of taking part in the defense of Taiwan. The million-dollar question, when will COVID end? Well, the pandemic just got over. The World Health Organization has decided to lift its global health emergency. The reason for this is the virus has weakened and the cases have gone down. New infections are not so serious either. Hence is a roundup of how things went south since 2020 when the coronavirus took our world under its grasp. Take a look.
On January 30th, 2020, the global health body sounded its highest alarm over what it then called the novel coronavirus. Well, the virus is still on the prowl, but it has seemingly lost its bite, and thankfully so. Life is back to normal. The era of work from home is over, and we are back to meeting and greeting as we used to earlier. But the initial 2 years were no less than a nightmare. The cases started to surge. No country was spared. The coronavirus struck hard. Hospitals were overwhelmed. About 765 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 have been reported to the WHO from around the world. The highly infectious coronavirus disease was first detected in Wuhan in China in December 2019. On the 30th of January, it was declared a global health emergency, and on the 11th of March, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. As cases rose, governments around the world took some harsh decisions. Lockdowns were imposed. People were forced to remain indoors. The scenes were apocalyptic. Bustling streets were empty. Malls, offices, cafes, markets, schools all seemed as haunted places. But hospitals were overwhelmed. In the middle of 2021, the Delta variant caused havoc. Patients gasped for breath. Healthcare systems around the world crumbled. This forced governments to reimpose the lockdowns. The logic was to save lives at the cost of livelihoods. And now finally, while we are back to our normal lives, the global economy continues to feel the pang of the pandemic. WHO's Emergency Committee meets every 3 months to discuss the pandemic. It reports to WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who then decides whether COVID-19 remains a so-called public health emergency, the highest level of alert. WHO estimates that COVID-19 deaths have dropped by 95% since the start of the year. Meanwhile, more than 13.3 billion vaccine doses have been administered.
That's all the time we have for WION Live Broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani. Thank you so much for staying with us and watching. But don't go away. A lot more news and headlines coming up next, only on WION World as well.
There are many other
As King Charles III gets officially crowned, WION goes to London to cover the coronation. A week-long coverage from the City of Dreams. A glorious spectacle of pageantry.